I have boundaries with people who overuse the word boundary. We do not need to slap the word boundary on every given situation and every rationale for why you want to avoid, resist, procrastinate, stonewall, any matter of minimizing, normalizing, or self-aggrandizing bullshit. Okay? The word boundary is like this weird magic word now that everyone loves to use as if it really gives them this aggrandizing, like, oh, I'm honoring myself. It's like you can just have boundaries and shut up about them. Boundaries are not really this big thing. Like, it's just your limits. There's this kind of weird way of talking about boundaries where you start to wonder if you're setting them because they're so over talked about that you start to forget what they are. Like for me, it's like because it's become this constant, incessant buzzword, it's like I started to overthink, maybe I'm being boundaryless in this situation. Or maybe I just need to assert boundaries here. And it's like, usually boundaries, like, yes, there's sometimes ways you don't assert them because you're used to kind of enmeshment, and I understand that there's conversations where, yes, like sometimes people need to assert them because they're not used to doing that, but it's just so tiresome the way people use it to rationalize, which is essentially sometimes just matter of ghosting or being inconsiderate and not communicating at all and avoiding. That's not having a boundary. Like that's just kind of that's you doing running away and then having an unspoken assumption that the other person, if they don't accept that you've run away, then they're invading your boundaries, or there's kind of a like mind reading going on there. I'm sick of this idea that if people don't get it, then they're not respecting your boundaries. Well, sometimes you're just like a child in a huff that's running off, and you're not honoring your boundaries. You're rationalizing a temper tantrum. You're rationalizing kind of a lot of avoidance, a fear of confrontation, or a desire to stonewall, to punish. Like, I'm really tired of this word boundaries being thrown around to rationalize really your bullshit. So if you happen to use the word boundaries like how most people use it, which is, I have just now started to have boundaries, and it's new to me. It's new to me because I'm just such a giving person. I'm usually just over giving to everyone, and so I'm just finally doing something for myself. I'm finally giving myself self-care. It's like, that's just, again, this self-aggrandizing, like pat on the back talk about boundaries. Like, it's so obnoxious. That's why when I'm around people that start talking like that, I mean, and then the thing is this gets contagious. It's not like I'm immune to not starting to talk like this, because it's just so prevalent in these kind of spiritual self-help, self-development, and just overall kind of millennial, and actually everyone started using the word boundaries like 7 years ago, and then now everyone's still using it, and they're still saying it with this same kind of weird poetry reading voice, like as though it just has this immense dimension and meaning, and you're like, what are you talking about? Like, you just said no? Great. Do you have to talk about it in this like, I hate to like put it down too, because I think that there is a truth. Obviously, everyone is using it more because it is a concept that maybe they thought they couldn't say no or have this or that, but it's like, there is something to be said about, yeah, you're not at the whim of people. You can say no, but there's also this kind of idea that is promoting that level of do whatever you feel and who cares about anybody else. That's really rationalizing a lot of that kind of self-care, self-involved, self-centered kind of way to basically disregard others for your own feelings instead of acknowledge that there's some responsibility here. Not everything, lack of consideration and calling that having boundaries is just that stretch where you're, again, propping yourself up to act as though your behavior is way more enlightened and self-aware than it is. So, for instance, like there's this element with this boundary talk also where people have this sense of martyrdom, like it's just so hard, but I'm really learning. And it's like, I just get so tired of this kind of using concepts like self-care and boundaries as this really, like, it's really propping yourself up. Like you're just such a giving person, and just now you just ask for this one thing, but you're not that way. Like you had a mask of being the people pleasing and the giver that was ultimately rooted in getting people to like you and hoping that they give back. And then now you found a new mask, which is basically saying whenever you want to do something for yourself that you're having a boundary and you're upholding it, and other people may not get it, but they have to because I'm worried about myself and self-care. And really all of these little strategies you're using, whether you're talking about boundaries in an aggrandizing way or whether you're giving to get, those are both of those are completely self-centered. So just stop pretending like you're such let's get rid of this kind of fake voice you're using when you're saying the word boundaries and then making a video about, hey everybody, boundaries matter. Like just stop, please. Because there's a lot of mind reading going on with boundaries where you're thinking that you're telling people where the wall is, but you're all actually just slamming the door in their face and not saying anything, and they don't know what you're doing. They just think they're not going to give you a plaque because you said no. They're just going to stay away from you, and then you're going to be like, oh, they couldn't handle my boundaries. It's like, no, they just don't know what's going on because you don't communicate directly. You just have this weird dialogue of spiritual new age concepts that uplift you and make you the hero in your story and everybody else the villain. So yeah, the thing about having boundaries, like I found myself using it as a rationale for I was receiving a bunch of paragraph texts from a friend who and it was that situation where you're in the middle of a fight and you get into fight or flight, and I usually get into fawn or freeze. I was in freeze when she was sending these because I was feeling that fear of confrontation, and I was feeling as though no matter what I said, I wouldn't be seen or understood. And what it was she asked me if I had gotten the V. This was about a year ago. And initially I said I had, and then I said that I was off-put by her questioning that. It made it feel like this conditional friendship where she had to have that established before she hung out with me. And then she was sending me these long texts that were basically all along the order of, I have to protect myself and I have a duty to the groups I'm hanging out with. And it was this kind of talk that basically in her movie and in her perspective, it was a completely normal question, and it was what anybody would ask, and it was great, and it's for safety and blah, 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 blah. And for me, I already knew that I wasn't going to be able to have my perspective in here because hers was so entrenched, and their whole culture and the people that she associates with they all reinforce it. And so for me to even get into how I just think people should be free to do what they need to do, and they can wait, they can do this, and they don't have to justify it and have a reason for why they don't, or I couldn't get into that. So I didn't feel like I could, and the texts that were long, I really just had that wall where I went out and I just didn't communicate. I basically avoided. I was avoiding. I was afraid of confrontation. I felt like no matter what I said, I wouldn't be seen or heard. And then I felt fear. I felt in freeze. And then I definitely didn't, I handled it by just not responding to those texts. So it was avoidance and stonewalling. And it was also that kind of freeze response. But I didn't communicate any of that. Like I didn't say directly, hi, I feel like no matter what I say, I won't be heard. And so I'm kind of in this freeze point. Like I didn't say that. So, but I remember at the time, how did I rationalize it? I rationalized it by acting like, well, I'm allowed to have my boundaries by like getting away from this situation that's uncomfortable because I have a boundary and blah, blah, blah. You know, I just used that concept to rationalize what is ultimately me running away from a fight. And she, of course, and then in this fight, she's rationalizing her boundary of wanting to know what my V status is before hanging out with me because it's for the safety of herself and all the people she hangs out with. And so she was kind of using that boundary talk. And the truth is none of that's true. None of us have these big boundaries. Like she does have boundaries because she's like, this is the boundary. And I thought, well, I can't meet that. So then my boundary was to get away. But when we're using those terms, it's adding this level of righteousness that's really not there. What's really there is a lot of fear. Some of the fear is created by this, like for her fear was really created by this constant conditioned response to otherizing people that don't get the V at the time. And then my response was a fear of not being seen or understood and being otherized and demonized for choosing what I want to do. And anyway, so what I'm saying is all of these little ways that people rationalize and it's really not just, it's not this like pat on the back boundaries kind of stuff. Situations that play out usually have, there's not this hero and villain. There's usually a lot of two people not able to see the other person's point of view. And when people start using these little, like, I had to do this for me and I had to honor my boundaries, all they're doing is rationalizing and giving themselves a prop up of acting like they're the hero in the story when, no. And having boundaries, like, when I look back at my life, before this kind of story where everyone started saying, everybody kind of has the origin story of how they never were able to have boundaries. And then I kind of started giving myself that origin story, like, I also have struggled to have boundaries. And it's like, no, actually I've always been pretty good at boundaries. I'm pretty good at saying no to sex, and for years. In fact, to the point where I worry that I'm too boundaried, like I should probably have less walls, because having a lot of boundaries and walls makes you're not really open to, you're a little bit too distrustful and not open to the possibility that people are trustworthy and just having a little more letting people in. So let's have the boundary where people who overuse the word boundary are out.